The transport shuttle doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Danny Morgan stepped onto Kethvara Station for the first time. He was 19 years old, the youngest human ever assigned to the Joint Species Engineering Exchange Program. His heart beat fast with excitement as he looked around at the massive orbital hub that would be his home for the next year. The station was enormous. Metal corridors stretched in every direction, lit by soft blue lights embedded in the walls. Thousands of beings from dozens of species moved through the walkways, going about their business. But Danny's eyes were drawn to the Vraxians. They were impossible to miss. Standing over 8 feet tall, the Vraxians were covered in thick scales that ranged from dark green to deep brown. Each one had 4 powerful arms ending in sharp claws. Their eyes were golden and slitted like a snake's, and when they spoke, their voices rumbled like distant thunder. The Vraxians had ruled this sector of space for 12,000 years. They were warriors, hunters, and conquerors. Their empire stretched across 100 star systems, and they looked at Danny the same way a wolf might look at a mouse. Danny walked through the arrival hall, carrying his single bag of belongings. He tried to stand tall, but he was painfully aware of how small he looked next to everyone else. At 5 feet 10 inches, he was average height for a human. Here, he felt like a child. A Vraxian officer checked his documents at the processing desk. The officer's forearms moved with practiced speed, tapping at holographic screens while his golden eyes studied Danny with obvious boredom. Terran, the officer said. The word sounded like an insult. Engineering apprentice. You are assigned to Section 7, Maintenance Division. Danny frowned. I was told I would be working with the Advanced Propulsion Team. My scores. Your scores mean nothing here, the officer interrupted, his lips pulled back to reveal rows of sharp teeth. You are human. You will work where we tell you to work. Section 7. Report to Supervisor Grath. Danny wanted to argue, but the look in the officer's eyes told him it would be pointless. He nodded quietly, took his assignment chip, and walked away. The first week was difficult. The second week was worse. Danny quickly learned that humans were not respected on Kethvara Station. The Vraxians called them soft skins and short-lived ones. They laughed at the fact that humans needed 8 hours of sleep every night. They mocked the way Danny had to eat 3 times a day instead of once a week like they did. They found it hilarious that he lacked claws, scales, or any natural weapons. In the communal eating hall, Vraxian cadets would deliberately sit at Danny's table just to stare at him while he ate. They would make comments in their own language and then laugh loudly. Danny did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning well enough. His supervisor, Grath, was no better. The old Vraxian had 4 faded scars running down the left side of his face, and he treated Danny like a servant. Instead of teaching him about the station's advanced systems, Grath assigned him to clean atmospheric filters in the lower decks. It was dirty, lonely work in sections of the station where no one important ever went. Danny did the work without complaint. Every night, after his shift ended, he would return to his tiny quarters and study the station's systems on his personal tablet. He memorized schematics, learned the layout of every deck, and read everything he could find about Vraxian engineering. If they would not teach him, he would teach himself. But the harassment did not stop. It grew worse. One evening, Danny was walking back to his quarters after a long shift. The corridor was empty and dimly lit. He was tired, his muscles ached, and all he wanted was to sleep. He did not notice the figures following him until it was too late. 3 Vraxian cadets stepped out of a side passage and blocked his path. They were young by Vraxian standards, probably around 40 years old, which was equivalent to Danny's age in human terms. Their scales were bright and unmarked, showing they had not yet seen real combat. But they were still twice his size, and each of them had 4 arms full of muscle and claws. Look what we found, the leader said. His name was Korax, and he had been tormenting Danny since the first day. The little Terran. All alone. Danny stopped walking. His heart began to beat faster, but he kept his face calm. I don't want any trouble. Trouble? Korax laughed. and his companions joined in. "We are not trouble, Soft Skin. We are just curious. We want to understand how a species as weak as yours ever left your own planet." Korax stepped forward and shoved Danny hard. Danny stumbled backward and hit the wall. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he did not cry out. "You should not be here," Korax hissed. His golden eyes were filled with contempt. "This station is for warriors. For hunters. For species that matter. You Terrans are prey animals pretending to be our equals. You disgust me." Danny said nothing. He knew that fighting back would only make things worse. The Vraxians were stronger. Faster. And there were 3 of them, so he stood there and took their insults, waiting for them to get bored. They shoved him a few more times. They called him names that he did not fully understand but knew were meant to hurt. Finally, after what felt like hours, Korax and his friends grew tired of the game and walked away, laughing among themselves. Danny stayed against the wall for a long moment, catching his breath. His shoulder throbbed where he had hit the metal surface. But he did not feel sorry for himself. He felt angry. A quiet, patient anger that burned deep in his chest. He would show them. He did not know how yet, but someday he would prove that humans were more than they believed. What Danny did not know was that someone else had been watching the entire scene. In the shadows of a side corridor, a massive figure stood perfectly still. He was taller than the cadets, broader in the shoulders, and covered in ritual scars that told the story of 100 hunts. His name was Draxen Varmoth, and he was called the Silent Death. He was the most feared hunter in the entire Vraxian fleet. Draxen had seen many things in his long life. He had killed creatures that could tear through starship hulls. He had walked on worlds where the air itself was poison. But something about the young human interested him. It was not strength. The Terran was clearly weak by Vraxian standards. It was not skill or speed or ferocity. It was the look in his eyes. The young human had stood there, outnumbered and outmatched. And he had not shown fear. He had not begged or pleaded. He had simply endured, his eyes burning with something that Draxen recognized: patience. Determination. The quiet promise of someone who refused to break. Draxen watched Danny walk away, limping slightly but holding his head high. Then the great hunter turned and disappeared into the darkness, thinking about what he had seen. 3 weeks passed on Kethvara Station. Danny continued his work in the lower decks, cleaning filters and doing the jobs that no one else wanted to do. The other species still looked at him with contempt. Korax and his friends still harassed him when they got the chance, but Danny kept his head down and kept learning. He had memorized almost every system on the station by now. He knew the layout of every deck, every maintenance tunnel, every emergency exit. He knew where the power conduits ran and how the life support systems worked. It was knowledge that no one had asked him to learn. But Danny believed that knowledge was never wasted. He was wrong about that. It was not wasted at all. The disaster began on a Tuesday. Danny was working in the lower engineering section when he felt the first vibration. It was subtle, just a slight tremor in the floor beneath his feet. Most people would have ignored it, but Danny had learned to pay attention to small details. He looked up from his work. Something was wrong. A moment later, the alarms began to scream. Red emergency lights filled the corridor. A loud voice echoed through the speakers, speaking in Vraxian. Danny did not understand all the words, but he understood enough. Reactor failure. Critical emergency. All personnel evacuate immediately. Danny dropped his tools and started running toward the nearest exit. But before he could reach it, a massive explosion rocked the station. The floor heaved beneath him, and he was thrown against the wall. Metal screamed and twisted. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency power. When Danny got back to his feet, the corridor ahead was blocked. Twisted metal and fallen debris completely covered the passage. The exit was gone. He turned around and ran the other way. But he found the same thing. Another collapse had sealed the corridor behind him. He was trapped. Danny forced himself to stay calm. Panic would not help him. He needed to think. He activated his personal communicator, but there was only static. The explosion must have damaged the communication systems. He was cut off from the rest of the station. Voices reached him from somewhere nearby. Danny followed the sound and found a side passage that was still open. He squeezed through a gap in the debris and emerged into a larger maintenance area. He was not alone. 12 Vraxian cadets were gathered in the room, and Danny recognized most of them. Corax was there, along with his 2 friends who had attacked Danny in the corridor weeks ago. The others were cadets from various training programs. They were all young, all scared, and all trapped, just like him. Corax looked up when Danny entered. For a moment, anger flashed in his golden eyes. But it quickly faded, replaced by something else. Fear. "The exits are blocked," one of the cadets said. Her name was Vetha, and she was one of the few Vraxians who had never been cruel to Danny. "We cannot reach the emergency shuttles. We cannot contact anyone. The communication systems are dead." "What happened?" Danny asked. "Reactor failure," another cadet answered. His voice was shaking. "The primary core is going critical. If it fully melts down, it will destroy the entire station." Danny felt cold. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 15 minutes. Maybe less." 15 minutes. 40,000 people lived on this station. Families, workers, soldiers, civilians. If the reactor exploded, they would all die. Danny's mind began working at full speed. He pulled up the station schematics from memory, visualizing every corridor, every system, every possible path. The primary reactor was beyond their reach, but there was a secondary control room that could access the emergency shutdown protocols. If someone could reach it and manually vent the core into space, the meltdown could be stopped. "There is a way," Danny said. Everyone looked at him. Corax made a sound of disgust. "Be quiet. Soft skin. The adults are thinking. I know how to stop the meltdown." Danny continued, ignoring the insult. "There is a secondary control room 3 levels up. From there, someone can manually override the reactor safeties and vent the core." Vetha stepped forward. "How do you know this?" "I have been studying the station systems for weeks. I know every tunnel and corridor. There is a path through the maintenance shafts that can reach the control room." Hope flickered in the eyes of some of the cadets. But then Corax shook his head. "The maintenance tunnels are suicide," he said. "Half of them are filled with superheated gas from the reactor leak. The temperatures are high enough to cook us alive, and some sections have lost atmosphere entirely. There is hard vacuum in parts of that route." "I know," Danny said quietly. "Then you know it is impossible. No Vraxian could survive that path. The heat alone would kill us in minutes." Danny took a deep breath. What he was about to say might be the most important words of his life. "Vraxians cannot survive it," he said. "But I can." Silence filled the room. Every golden eye turned to stare at him. "Humans are different," Danny explained. "We do not need as much oxygen as you do. I can hold my breath for almost 4 minutes if I have to, and our bodies can handle higher temperatures for longer periods. It will hurt. It might kill me. But I have a chance." Corax laughed bitterly. "You? The weak little Terran? You think you can do what we cannot?" Danny met his eyes without flinching. "Yes, this is madness. You will die in there, maybe. But if I do nothing, everyone on this station dies for certain. All 40,000 of them, including you." The cadets exchanged uncertain looks. They did not want to trust the human they had mocked and abused, but they had no other options. The clock was ticking, and no one else was offering a solution. Finally, Vetha spoke. "What do you need?" Danny looked around the room. "Insulating material. Anything that can protect my hands and feet from the heat. And someone needs to tell me exactly which conduits are leaking superheated gas. I need to plan my route." The cadets hesitated for only a moment. Then they began to move, tearing fabric and padding from the walls, sharing what information they had about the damaged sections. Even Corax helped, though his expression showed he expected Danny to fail. Danny wrapped his hands and feet in layers of insulating material. He reviewed the route in his mind one more time. The path was long and dangerous. Superheated corridors, toxic gas pockets, sections with no air at all. Any one of them could kill him, but he had no choice. When he was ready, Danny walked to the entrance of the maintenance tunnel. Hot air was already flowing out, carrying the smell of burning metal. The temperature inside was already well above what any Vraxian could safely endure. He looked back at the cadets one last time. They were all watching him. Korax, Vetha, the others who had mocked him, bullied him, told him he did not belong here. Danny did not say goodbye. He simply turned and walked into the fire. The heat hit Danny like a physical wall. The moment he entered the maintenance tunnel, the temperature jumped from uncomfortable to painful. Sweat immediately began pouring down his face. His lungs burned with every breath of the superheated air, but he did not stop. He could not stop. Danny moved forward through the narrow metal corridor. The walls around him glowed a dull orange from the heat bleeding through from damaged conduits. His wrapped hands protected him somewhat, but he could still feel the burning metal through the insulation. Every surface was hot enough to cause pain. The first section took 5 minutes to cross. By the time Danny reached the junction point, his skin was red and starting to blister. His throat felt raw from breathing the scorching air, but he forced himself to keep moving. According to his mental map, the next section was even worse. A coolant pipe had burst, flooding the corridor with toxic gas. The gas itself was not immediately deadly, but it would burn his eyes and lungs if he breathed it for too long. Danny took several deep breaths of the cleaner air at the junction. Then he held his breath and plunged forward. The green gas surrounded him immediately. His eyes began to water and sting. He kept them narrowed to slits, just open enough to see where he was going. His lungs screamed for air, but Danny refused to breathe. He had trained for breath-holding exercises back on Earth. He knew he could hold it for at least 3 minutes if he stayed calm. The toxic section stretched for nearly 200 meters. Danny moved as fast as he dared, crawling through narrow passages and climbing over broken equipment. His chest grew tight. His head began to pound. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. At 3 minutes and 12 seconds, he finally emerged from the gas cloud. Danny gasped for air, coughing and choking as he collapsed against a wall. His eyes were swollen and streaming with tears, but he was still alive. He was still moving forward. Just a little further, he whispered to himself. His voice was hoarse and weak. Just keep going. The third section was the worst of all. A hull breach had exposed part of the maintenance tunnel to open space. The emergency force fields had failed in this area, which meant there was a 20-meter stretch with no atmosphere at all. Hard vacuum, absolute zero temperatures, instant death for anyone who stayed too long. Danny had read about what happened to human bodies in vacuum. The saliva on your tongue would boil. Your blood vessels would expand. Your lungs would try to explode. Most people would lose consciousness in about 15 seconds. Brain death would follow in about 90 seconds. Danny had to cross 20 meters in less time than that. He stood at the edge of the vacuum section, looking at the stars visible through the breach in the hull. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. The universe stretched out forever, cold and endless and completely indifferent to whether he lived or died. Danny took slow, deep breaths. He was hyperventilating on purpose, filling his blood with as much oxygen as possible. He had read that controlled oxygen deprivation could slow the heart rate and extend the time before unconsciousness. He had never tested this theory before. He was about to find out if it worked. When he felt ready, Danny exhaled completely. Entering vacuum with full lungs would cause them to rupture. Then he closed his eyes, pushed off the wall, and threw himself into the void. The cold hit him instantly. It was beyond anything he had ever felt before. His skin seemed to freeze and burn at the same time. He could feel the moisture on his eyes beginning to crystallize. His body tried to scream, but there was no air to carry the sound. Danny pushed forward. 1 step. 2 steps. His vision was going dark. His fingers were turning blue. Ice crystals were forming in his nose and mouth. Every cell in his body was screaming at him to stop, to give up, to accept the peaceful embrace of death. But Danny Morgan was human. And humans did not give up. 10 meters. 15. His hands found a doorframe. He pulled himself through. His foot caught on something, and he fell forward into the pressurized section beyond. Air surrounded him again. Danny lay on the floor, gasping and shaking. His fingers were covered in frostbite. Blood vessels had burst in his eyes, turning the whites red. Ice was still melting in his hair and eyebrows. He had made the crossing in 32 seconds. Danny allowed himself exactly 60 seconds to recover. Then he forced himself back to his feet and kept walking. The final stretch was almost merciful compared to what came before. Just more heat. More narrow passages. More climbing through broken equipment. Danny's body was failing him now. His hands could barely grip anything. His legs shook with every step, but he kept moving, driven by pure, stubborn will. At 47 minutes after entering the tunnels, Danny Morgan reached the secondary control room. The door was sealed, but the manual override still worked. Danny punched in the emergency code with trembling, burned fingers. The door slid open, and he stumbled inside. The control room was dark, except for the glow of emergency screens. Red warnings flashed everywhere. The reactor status display showed the core temperature climbing toward critical. The countdown timer showed less than 90 seconds until complete meltdown. Danny dragged himself to the main console. His vision was blurry. His hands left bloody smears on the controls. But his mind was still sharp enough to remember what he needed to do. First, he disabled the automatic safety locks. The computer tried to fight him, demanding authorization codes. Danny bypassed it manually, using tricks he had learned from studying the Vraxian systems during his weeks of being ignored and underestimated. Second, he accessed the core ventilation controls. The station had emergency vents that could release the reactor contents directly into space. It was a last resort option, never meant to be used. But desperate times required desperate measures. Third, with 43 seconds remaining on the countdown, Danny activated the emergency vent sequence. The station shuddered. Somewhere far below, massive doors opened, and the superheated material from the reactor core was blasted out into the vacuum of space. The containment system screamed in protest. Warning lights flashed even brighter than before. Then, slowly, the alarms began to stop. The countdown froze. The temperature readings began to fall. Danny stared at the screen, not quite believing what he was seeing. He had done it. He had stopped the meltdown. The station was safe. 40,000 people would live because a 19-year-old human had refused to accept that something was impossible. A laugh bubbled up from his chest. It turned into a cough. Then a sob. His body had nothing left to give. Danny collapsed onto the floor of the control room, his consciousness fading into darkness. The last thing he saw before passing out was the main screen displaying 2 words in Vraxian text. Even with his limited knowledge of the language, Danny understood what they meant. Core stable. He smiled, and then the darkness took him. Hours later, rescue teams would cut through the sealed doors and find him there. They would find a small, broken human lying in a pool of his own blood, barely breathing, covered in burns and frostbite and burst blood vessels. But they would also find a station that was still standing. 40,000 lives that had been saved. And they would find a legend being born. Danny opened his eyes slowly. The light above him was soft and white, very different from the harsh red emergency glow he remembered. He tried to move, but his body refused to cooperate. Everything hurt in ways he had never experienced before. "Ah, you are awake." The voice was deep and rumbling. Danny turned his head and saw a Vraxian doctor standing beside his bed. The doctor was old, with faded gray scales and careful eyes. He was studying a holographic display that showed Danny's vital signs. "Where am I?" Danny's voice came out as a rough whisper. "The medical bay. You have been unconscious for 3 days." The doctor made a notation on his display. "You are extremely fortunate to be alive. Most beings would not have survived what you experienced." Danny tried to lift his hands, but they were wrapped in thick layers of regeneration gel. He could not feel his fingers at all. Your hands suffered severe burns and frostbite, the doctor continued. We are treating them with cellular regeneration technology. You should regain full function within 2 weeks. Your lungs were damaged from thermal exposure and toxic gas inhalation. We have repaired most of the tissue. Your eyes are healing from burst blood vessels. The redness will fade in a few days. The doctor paused, looking at Danny with an expression that was difficult to read. I have treated warriors who survived battles with the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. I have never seen injuries quite like yours. The fact that you are conscious and speaking is remarkable. Danny did not know what to say. He lay in silence, staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together what had happened after he lost consciousness. The doctor answered his unspoken question. The station is safe. Your actions stopped the reactor meltdown. 42,317 people owe their lives to you. The number seemed unreal. Danny could not process it. He had simply done what needed to be done. He had not thought about how many people he was saving. The cadets who were trapped with you have told everyone what happened, the doctor added. The recordings from the maintenance tunnel sensors have been reviewed by Station Command. Everyone has seen what you did, how you walked through conditions that would have killed any Vraxian in minutes. Danny closed his eyes. He did not want fame or recognition. He just wanted to rest. Over the next few days, Danny received many visitors. The Vraxian cadets who had been trapped with him came first. Vitha arrived with a small gift. A polished stone from her homeworld that was traditionally given to warriors who had shown exceptional courage. She pressed it into Danny's bandaged hand and thanked him with tears in her golden eyes. Other cadets followed. Most of them had never spoken a kind word to Danny before. Now they stood awkwardly beside his bed, struggling to express gratitude in a language that did not come naturally to their warrior culture. Some of them simply bowed their heads and left without speaking. For Vraxians, that gesture said more than words ever could. Corax came last. The young warrior who had bullied Danny from his first day stood in the doorway for a long moment. His scales seemed duller than usual, his posture less aggressive. Finally, he walked to the bed and stood there in silence. I was wrong about you, Corax said at last. The words seemed to cause him physical pain. I called you weak. I said you did not belong here. I treated you like prey. He paused, his jaw tight. But you saved my life. You saved all of us. A true warrior admits when he has been wrong. He bowed his head, then turned and left, before Danny could respond. On the 4th day, Commander Corveth visited the medical bay. The station commander was an imposing figure, even by Vraxian standards. His scales were dark and weathered, marked with countless scars from decades of combat and command. When he entered the room, every other patient went silent. When he walked to Danny's bed, his footsteps echoed like thunder. Corveth stood over Danny and studied him for a long moment. His golden eyes revealed nothing. I assigned you to maintenance work, the commander said. I believed humans were not worthy of meaningful positions. I was implementing policy that had been in place for years. He paused. I was wrong to follow that policy without question. You have proven that worth is not determined by species. Corveth bowed his head deeply. The gesture of respect lasted for several seconds. Then, without another word, the commander turned and walked away. Danny was stunned. The highest authority on the station had just apologized to him. The universe seemed to be turning upside down. But the most significant visit came later that same day. The medical bay had grown quiet as evening approached. Most of the staff had left for their shift change. Danny was alone with his thoughts, still trying to process everything that had happened. Then the door opened, and a figure entered that made the air itself seem to grow cold. Draxon Varmoth was even more imposing up close than he had appeared in the shadows weeks ago. He stood over 8 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. His scales were dark gray, almost black, and covered with ritual scars that formed complex patterns across his arms and chest. Each scar represented a kill, a hunt, a moment of triumph over death. He was called the Silent Death for good reason. When he moved, he made no sound at all, despite his massive size. Draxon walked slowly to Danny's bed and stood there, looking down at the injured human. His golden eyes were ancient and deep, holding knowledge of things that Danny could not imagine. No one spoke. The silence stretched between them like a living thing. Finally, Draxon spoke. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. I watched you. That night in the corridor, when the young fools attacked you, I stood in the shadows and observed. Danny remembered that night. The shoving, the insults, the helpless anger. I saw something in you that night, Draxon continued. Something that the others were too blind to see. They looked at your soft skin and your small body. They saw weakness. But I have hunted creatures across 1,000 worlds. I know how to recognize a predator when I see one. Danny did not understand. He was not a predator. He was just a human, a member of a species that the Vraxians considered barely worth noticing. Draxon seemed to read his thoughts. You think a predator is defined by claws and teeth and strength? That is what children believe. A true predator is defined by something else. By will. By patience. By the refusal to be broken. He leaned closer, his scarred face filling Danny's vision. You walked through fire that would have killed my strongest warriors. You crossed the void and survived. You saved 40,000 lives, including the very creatures who had tormented you. And when I look in your eyes, I do not see anger or resentment. I see the same thing I saw that night in the corridor. What do you see? Danny whispered. The spirit of a hunter, Draxon answered. Someone who knows that the greatest strength is not in the body, but in the soul. Someone who endures. Someone who never, ever stops. The great hunter straightened up. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I have killed beasts that could tear through starship hulls. I have fought creatures of nightmare that would drive lesser beings mad with terror. In all my years, I have never met a being who impressed me as you have. Draxon reached down and placed his clawed hand on Danny's shoulder. The touch was surprisingly gentle. You are worthy, he said. More worthy than any of them will ever understand. Draxon's hand remained on Danny's shoulder. The weight of it was somehow comforting, like an anchor holding him to the present moment. Danny looked up at the legendary hunter and saw something in those ancient golden eyes that he had never expected to find. Respect. Among my people, Draxon said slowly, there is a bond that exists beyond blood, beyond species, beyond all the boundaries that divide the universe into us and them. It is a bond between hunters, between those who have proven themselves in the fire of impossible odds. Danny did not speak. He sensed that something important was about to happen, something he should not interrupt. Draxon removed his hand from Danny's shoulder and took a step back. Then, to Danny's absolute shock, the great hunter lowered himself to one knee. The position brought his scarred face level with Danny's bed. Golden eyes met human eyes without any barrier between them. I am Draxon Varmoth of the Varmoth hunting clan, he said. His voice had taken on a formal, ceremonial quality. For 673 years, no outsider has been welcomed into our brotherhood. Our traditions are ancient. Our standards are absolute. We do not give this honor lightly. Danny's heart was pounding. He could barely breathe. Draxon reached up and touched one of the ritual scars on his own shoulder. This mark represents my first kill. A cave beast on my home world. When I was barely old enough to hold a weapon, every scar tells a story. Every mark is earned through blood and fire and will. His hand moved to an unmarked section of his scaled chest, just over his heart. There is one mark I have never given. The mark of brotherhood, the symbol that binds two hunters together as family, regardless of where they were born or what they look like. His eyes locked onto Danny's. I offer this mark to you now, Danny Morgan of Earth. The words hung in the air like something sacred. You have walked through fire that would have killed my warriors. You have crossed the void between stars using nothing but the strength of your spirit. You have saved the lives of those who treated you with cruelty. And you did it without hesitation, without expectation of reward. Draxon paused. These are not the actions of a weak species. These are the actions of a true predator. He spoke the next words in the ancient language of his clan. Danny did not understand them, but he felt their power. They seemed to resonate in the air, in his bones, in his very soul. Then Draxon translated, "I name you brother. I claim you as family. From this day until my final hunt. Your enemies are my enemies. Your battles are my battles. Your honor is my honor." Draxon rose to his feet. He looked at Danny with an expression that was somehow both fierce and gentle. "Will you accept this bond?" Danny stared at the legendary hunter. A few weeks ago, he had been a nobody, a maintenance worker, a soft skin that the Vraxians mocked and ignored. Now the most feared warrior in their entire civilization was kneeling before him, offering him a place in an ancient brotherhood that had not accepted an outsider in 6 centuries. The answer came from somewhere deep inside him, from the same place that had driven him to walk through fire and cross the void. "Yes," Danny said, "I accept." Something changed in that moment. Danny could feel it, though he could not explain it. A connection had formed between him and Draxon, invisible but unbreakable. The hunter's thin lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Then rise, brother," Draxon said. "Your place at my side is waiting." The news spread across Kethvara Station within hours. Draxon Varmoth, the Silent Death, had claimed a human as his brother. A Terran had been welcomed into the Varmoth hunting clan. The rigid walls of Vraxian tradition had cracked, and something new was growing through the gaps. The reactions were mixed, as Danny expected. Some Vraxians were outraged. They saw the gesture as an insult to their culture, a corruption of sacred traditions. They complained loudly to Station Command, demanding that the bond be rejected. But many others felt differently. The cadets who had been trapped in the reactor section spoke publicly about what Danny had done. They described his calm leadership, his willingness to sacrifice himself, his journey through conditions that would have killed any Vraxian. Recording footage from the maintenance tunnels was shared across communication networks. Millions of beings watched the small human crawl through fire and cross the void, refusing to give up even as his body was destroyed. Something shifted in how the Vraxians saw humanity. Not everyone changed their minds, of course. Prejudice dies slowly, and there were many who continued to view humans as an inferior species. But the conversation had begun. Questions were being asked. Assumptions were being challenged. Danny was released from the medical bay after 2 weeks. His hands had healed completely, leaving only faint scars that he chose to keep as reminders. His lungs were stronger than before, repaired by the advanced Vraxian medical technology. The redness had faded from his eyes, leaving them clear and sharp. His first act upon leaving was to visit Commander Corveth. The station commander received him in his private office, a large room filled with trophies from a lifetime of military service. Corveth stood when Danny entered, a gesture of respect that he offered to very few. "What can I do for you, Engineer Morgan?" Danny smiled at the new title. He was no longer assigned to maintenance work. "I wanted to thank you, Commander, and to tell you that I plan to stay on the station, to continue learning, to build bridges between our species." Corveth nodded slowly. "You would be welcome. Your actions have earned you that right and more." He hesitated. "I should tell you that Anthropic Command has offered you a position on the elite engineering team, the Advanced Propulsion Division, the assignment you were originally supposed to receive." "I would like that very much," Danny said. In the weeks that followed, Danny found his place on Kethvara Station. He worked with the propulsion team during the day, learning from engineers who now treated him as an equal. In the evenings, he spent time with Draxon, learning the ways of the Vraxian hunt. The great hunter was a patient teacher. He shared the philosophy of his people, their code of honor, their understanding of what it meant to face death without fear. In return, Danny told stories of Earth. He spoke of humanity's long history, their struggles and triumphs, their stubborn refusal to be defeated by anything the universe threw at them. He told Draxon about the ancient human hunters who had chased prey across endless plains, running for hours until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. He explained how humans had evolved not to be the fastest or strongest, but to endure, to outlast, to never stop moving forward. Draxon listened with fascination. He had never known these things about the species he had dismissed as weak. "Your ancestors were predators," he said one evening, as they sat together watching the stars through a viewport. "Not like us. Different. But predators nonetheless." Danny nodded. "We just forgot. For a while. Living on a peaceful planet, surrounded by technology that did everything for us. We forgot what we were capable of." "You remembered," Draxon said. "In that tunnel, in the fire, and the void. You remembered." "I did." The great hunter placed his clawed hand on Danny's shoulder. The same gesture he had used in the medical bay. "And now others will remember too. Your people, and mine, because of what you did here." Danny looked out at the stars. Somewhere among those countless points of light was Earth. His home. A small blue world that had produced a species everyone else thought was weak. He smiled. The Vraxians had ruled their sector of space for 12,000 years. They had conquered dozens of worlds. They had never met an enemy they could not defeat. But they had never encountered humans before. Not really. They had seen the soft skin, and the need for sleep, and the lack of claws. They had not seen what lay beneath. Danny Morgan had shown them the truth. And word was spreading. Across the Vraxian dominion, in government chambers and military academies and ships patrolling the borders of known space, beings were whispering about the young Terran who had walked through fire, the soft skin who had saved 40,000 lives, the human who had earned the brotherhood of the silent death. Perhaps, they whispered, they had misjudged the Terrans. Perhaps the young species was more than they appeared. Perhaps humans were not children playing at civilization. Perhaps they were something far more dangerous. A species of predators who had simply been waiting for their moment. A species that refused to die.